Hello, this is my 2.5 year update for my DIY tracking system. Now note, I haven't actually lost power to anything and none of my refrigerators has warmed up. So it has worked, but one of these subsystems had a critical failure. And this is related to my solar panel there and how the motor has seized up, I think, on the sun sensor is misaligned now on the right side panel. But that's not actually what caused the problems. What had caused the problem is I had added an extra unexpected load into a spot that was vulnerable to failure. And the reason for it is I had plugged that Wi-Fi my main Wi-Fi into the power socket here. And when the voltage on the battery gets low, it would switch to backup power away from this. But in this case, it was still drawing power to the Wi-Fi, so it went below the critical threshold for the battery safety controller to switch off. So that was kind of a failure. So now I've done the same thing except plugged it into a more powerful battery that's a larger array of lead acid. Later on, I'll have to think about how to fix that. I had designed the system to disconnect itself and have enough battery juice remaining to make it overnight to the next solar charge cycle, even with limited sunlight for a cloudy day. And each subsystem and power system would then switch to the next up power system, up to the 2 kilowatt final inverter, which would remain as the final ultimate backup power. The failure occurred in this bottom right corner subsystem, or more specifically because I added an extra load to this 1 kilowatt inverter. And here is this particular subsystem. The components are on the wall. And here is the seemingly innocent light load that I added, which is now connected to an extension cord that goes elsewhere. And all it does is run my Wi-Fi. But that, through a chain reaction, caused a battery failure. Now I'm going to reactivate the battery safety. You basically do it by short-circuiting across the battery manager. And now it'll start showing voltage there. And it should also have turned the inverter on, and now the voltage adapters the buck boost converters are also running. And now it's charging up again. But how did this happen? I have a massive multiply redundant system. Now granted, the power didn't actually go out and the system worked as intended, but it switched to redundancy. But everything had been carefully calculated and timed such that this should never happen. But first, let's go over the system details. And here, for example, I'm showing the first set of batteries is a large array of lead acid batteries. This is 900 amp hours of Renogy lead acid. This is the base of the system and the ultimate default. These are charged by two MPPTs, a 20 amp and a 40 amp. And you can see them as the two leftmost units here, these MPPT Renogys. And you'll notice the rightmost one is off, and that's because that was the power failure involved one. This is backed up by a Centaur, which is timed to recharge for a few hours at midnight. And here's the Centaur going into the power distributors that recharge the batteries. And these run a large 2 kilowatt inverter, which is has its own loads, but is also the ultimate backup in case of failure of any of the 1 kilowatt upstream. And now let's discuss one of the 1 kilowatt subsystems, which is the kitchen subsystem. It's connected here, and it's got a circuit breaker and everything that goes into the kitchen refrigerator. And it's got a fairly beefy lithium-ion battery made up of 6 Nissan Leaf modules, as you can see here, as its primary battery. This is also the one that had the battery failure. Because Renogy inverters can't handle lithium-ion batteries and instead are designed for lead acid, I have to use these isolated DC-DC converters in between. These are actually fairly efficient and do not waste too much power. I do think they are a few watts of passive load, but it's not a big deal compared to the main load, which is a refrigerator. Then I have my really hefty subsystem, which is a fairly large lithium-ion battery made up of 12 Nissan Leaf units. This is charged by 3 separate MPPT controllers, one from each of my different large solar arrays. One of them is 20 amps and the other 2 are 40 amps. I also have a power in and a distributor, partly for safety and partly for cable management and organization. I might someday add some sort of a battery monitor to it. Then because Renogy does not handle lithium-ion well, I also have the same 12-volt converter, but here it's mounted sideways and sort of out of view, but it's similar to the one that goes to the kitchen. Then I've got a 1 kilowatt Renogy inverter that runs, that goes to an automatic transfer switch that defaults to the 2 kilowatt in case of failure, but otherwise runs a couple refrigerators and a freezer. Can easily handle the initial surge current for starting up, but if you have like 2 refrigerators or freezers going through a defrost cycle at the same time, you might have problems. In this case, it just kind of beeps and causes them to abort their defrost cycles, and one of them might restart it, the other one might not. So the system is designed to handle a low battery anywhere in the system and a failure of any solar panel subsystem, and it should still continue to work. But I had a seized up panel motor, it's the angle sensor for the sun that's messed up. That's causing the motor to not run on the servo. That reduced the power that I was getting into my system, and I didn't maintain it because I was too busy. And at the same time, I added an extra load where I shouldn't have, and the days started getting shorter because the winter is approaching. This, combined with several cloudy days in a row, conspired to cause the battery shutdown on the kitchen battery. I had attempted to make the ultimate survivalist system that would remain up for many years. Well, I guess 2.5 years is pretty long. But I made the mistake of changing something, that is, adjusting where I plugged in my Wi-Fi. And so the lesson of the day is, if you've got a working system, don't mess with it.